Hello wonderful person, this is Anton and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program and to learning programming Kerbal Space Program and basically creating your own automatic script that allows us to launch into orbit, get into orbit, land back on Kerbin, go to other planets, go to other moons, and so on and so forth. Basically, we're making our mech jab. In today's video, we're going to start focusing on gravity turn, and we're going to use the pre-made script from the tutorial for kRPC, and we're going to learn a little bit more about how gravity turns work. Welcome to What the Math. So this script is actually on kRPC website right here. If you click on launch into orbit, you can find various languages for it as well. I'm going to basically first explain it to you very briefly. We're going to then try it, but we also are going to add our own part to it from the previous video to adjust for the speed, because this script right here for my craft at least didn't work very well because it was going so fast and it wasn't adjusting for the speed and for changing throttle. At some point my craft started actually spinning around. I'll show it to you when we try to launch it. So there's several parts to it. It does look a little bit intimidating and long at first, but it's actually pretty simple. We've covered these parts in previous videos. This is always here. These are streams we've talked about, and here we have several values. We have the altitude value, apoapsis, resources for stage 2. Basically, this is our fuel, and here we're checking for stage 2 specifically. This here is related to stage 2 resources, and is basically checking for solid fuel. We have liquid fuel, so we're going to change this later on. It also has this UT, which is standard time. Basically, this is the actual time in Kerbal Space Program. I don't remember what U stands for, but I'm guessing it's universal. Then we have 3 new commands. These are control commands. This here basically disables SAS. This disables RCS, which you don't have to do, but it does help. And this here puts your throttle into 1. We will be adjusting this ourselves. Then it prints 3, 2, 1 and launches your craft. There is a second part here that basically then activates the stage. This is the command for activating stages. You'll be using this a lot if you're making your own scripts. This engages Autopilot. This right here tells Autopilot to pitch and head toward 9090. If you've done a lot of Kerbal Space Program, you know that 9090 refers to the position on the compass that refers to this right here. In other words, it's saying go up and then go east. This is what we need to do to basically achieve a perfect orbital ascent. If you go west, you actually are not being efficient, because right now our orbital speed is 175 meters per second eastwards. If you go west, it means that you have to first make this 0 and then go opposite direction. So you're actually losing some fuel here if you're going west. And that's because the Kerbin is actually spinning eastwards, so you're going with the actual spin. And then in the beginning, this script here adds 2 more things. First of all, it has this variable called SRBS separated. This refers to the actual boosters, and it starts as false. We don't really need to do it this way, but we're going to go with the script for now, just in case you want to check this yourself later. The initial turn angle is 0. This is where the while loop starts, and here the way that they wrote this is by having 3 conditional checks. And basically these 3, they check for 3 things. The first one checks for if the altitude is more than your turn start altitude. Now what exactly is this? Turn start altitude, if you haven't really seen it in the beginning, is right here. This is a variable defined in the beginning, and basically it says, I want to start turning at 250 meters. You can change this to whatever you want. You may also want to do some research, depending on what your target altitude is for your orbit, what exactly you want this to be. So, for example, if you want your actual orbit to be at 70 kilometers, which is the absolute minimum for orbits, you will change this to 70,000, but you might also keep this at 250, but change this to, like, I don't know, 30,000 or something. It needs to be a little bit lower. 45,000 might be a little bit too much. It doesn't really change things that much, but it does actually help you save a little bit of fuel if you change this to a lower value. This, however, might stay the same. This should be at around 250. This is where you would want to start your gravity turn. If you don't know why we do gravity turn, Here's actually a visual representation of how it used to be done in older Kerbal. This is from a person by the name of Kulebron. It's essentially because you at some point want to go sideways, right? Because you're orbiting around the planet, you want to go sideways. But if you just go up and then turn sideways and start accelerating, you're losing a tremendous amount of fuel because you basically are moving this way instead of moving directly into that position. So making a parabolic kind of ascent is the most optimal way of achieving orbit without wasting too much fuel. It used to be that you would just go to 10 kilometers, turn 45 degrees sideways, and then blast a little bit, and then turn again and blast a little bit. This was with older Kerbal Space Program. New Kerbal Space Program is more complicated, so it's actually better to have a parabolic approach. And starting your turn at 250 is the safest and usually the most efficient way of doing this, or at least below 1 kilometer. If you start at 1 kilometer, you already have lost a lot of fuel because you're actually fighting against gravity and not getting enough horizontal speed. So we're going to be doing this from 250 until about 45 kilometers. And so this is what's happening in this particular conditional. It's checking if your altitude is higher than minimal altitude, but lower than maximum altitude. So basically, in between these two altitudes, we're going to be running this stuff. And what it does here is it takes the altitude, subtracts it from start altitude. So let's say you're 1,000 meters. This means 1,000 minus 250, which will give you 750. Then we'll check for end altitude, which is 45,000, minus turn start altitude, which is 250, and then it will find a ratio. And using this ratio, it will assign it to an angle multiplied by 90. So basically, the higher in altitude you are, the closer you are to the final sort of altitude, the more closer to 90 degrees you'll be. So here you'll be at 0. So then at around 22,500 meters, you'll be closer to about 45 degrees. And at 45,000, you'll be at 90 degrees. So this is exactly what's happening here. And it basically does this by taking the absolute value of new angle minus turn angle, which here was 0. And if the difference between these angles is higher than 0.5, so in other words, if the new angle is like 23 degrees and the old angle was 22.5, it will then create or change the turn angle to a new turn angle, so it will basically reassign them and assign your actual pitch to this value. So it automatically adjusts the angles essentially. The second conditional here only checks for one thing: if you ran out of fuel in your second stage. If the fuel is less than 0.1, it will then activate the next stage, set this value that used to be false to true. So it basically no longer checks for if you have any fuel left, and then prints that the SRBs have separated. And lastly, the third conditional here checks if your apoapsis, or basically the highest point in your orbit, is more than target altitude, which in our case is 150 kilometers, multiplied by 0.9. Why is this doing this multiplication? Well, the only reason is because you don't want to blast full speed ahead until your apoapsis, because it's actually easy to miss this mark. So if we reach the value of 90% of our target altitude, which I think is... Okay, I had to actually cheat and look what happened in the calculator. It's 135. If you reach the altitude of 135 kilometers for your apoapsis, it will then print that we are approaching target apoapsis and stop the entire loop. Break means that you're going to stop the whole loop and go to the next step. Now, where is the next step? It's right here below. This is the next part of the script. So this means that this loop will no longer work. Here we're doing two things. One is we're setting our throttle to 25% of the original throttle, and then we're starting a new loop that checks for apoapsis. And once the apoapsis is just under the actual target apoapsis, it will once again stop this loop. Until that, it actually just continuously passes the loop. In other words, this loop is completely empty. Nothing is happening in it. You can put a print command here just to say a loop is running. But right now, it's basically just, it freezes the script completely and lets it run in a loop until your apoapsis meets the requirement. So once you reach the target altitude, it will then say, okay, now we reached the apoapsis, and it turns off your engine completely, then prints this new command, or prints this message basically saying coasting out of atmosphere, And until you reach altitude of 70,500 meters, it does absolutely nothing. Once this altitude is reached though, it says, now I'm going to be planning circularization burn. And this is where a bit of math comes in. It's kind of difficult to explain in one video, but basically there's two things happening here. The first thing assigns several variables. It assigns a gravitational parameter from Kerbal Space Program, assigns the actual apoapsis of the orbit. It also takes the same major axis of the vehicle, it takes the radius, and uses this formula called Vis-Viva equation, which I think deserves its own video, to plan out your orbital burn to get a completely circular orbit. Now, this equation uses this formula right here. Basically, v squared equals to the gravitational parameter, and it takes the radius and the semi-major axes of the actual object. I'm not going to go into details about this just yet because it deserves its own video, like I said, but it returns a value to you, which you can then use to calculate delta V, or basically the amount of fuel or velocity you need to increase your velocity by in order for you to achieve perfect orbit. This is a new variable called delta V, and it's calculated using this formula. And here we have a new command which basically creates a new node. You probably already know how nodes work in Kerbal Space Program, and if not, well, you might want to check out some of the previous videos because it's a difficult concept to explain in one video. But essentially, it assigns a node, and here it accepts several parameters. One of them is the time when the node is initiated, and here we're taking that UT from before, which is universal time, adding the time to apoapsis to it. This is a command that's available to us, and also adding the actual delta V value. So here it creates a node that will basically have this delta V value, and I'm going to show it to you when we launch the script as well. The second part here, as it says here, it calculates burn time. So how long do you have to burn for using the engines you currently have, and when do you have to stop your engines? Now, this is not really a requirement, but to make a perfect orbital sort of circle, you do need to use this. I normally don't use this for rough estimations, but it does help. Here we take the thrust of the actual vehicle, we take the specific impulse, so all of these come from the actual vehicle itself. They're different for every single rocket. We take the mass of the rocket, we take the delta V divided by specific impulse of the actual vehicle. We then calculate the flow rate, and finally we get the burn time. So basically this here gives you the value in seconds for how long do you have to burn to achieve this delta V. This is used later on in the script right here, where we first orient our ship. This basically puts your ship in the prograde direction toward the velocity vector. We then basically just wait, and this is where we use that value we calculated right here, the burn time value. This basically calculates the time we need to start the burn, and it's usually done by looking at the apoapsis, dividing the burn time in half, and adding it right before the apoapsis, so that this way you'll have a perfectly circular orbit. And lastly, we warp to. Warp to is basically, it accelerates time to the actual time right before the burn. Lastly, we wait until we reach this part in the orbit, then engage our vessel, wait until we're almost at the time before the burn time is over. Then we decrease the throttle to about 5% so that we can actually adjust and create a perfect orbit. And lastly, this part right here waits until the orbit is almost entirely circular. Basically, it looks for a perfect orbit, and removes the node at the end. Prints launch complete. So this is what we're going to be using, and we're going to actually do this with a little bit of adjustments so that we can actually create it for our own rocket. And the first adjustment we're going to do is, okay, I'm going to change this to not 35, let's say 40,000 meters. Our target altitude is going to be 100 kilometers. We're also going to change this part to liquid fuel. Then I want my initial throttle to be 0.5. Actually, no, let's go with 1. This doesn't have to be changed. Everything else will stay the same except for Oh no, I think actually that's it. So this is just the first attempt. I'm going to do this without adjusting for speed and show you what the problem with this is. I believe there's nothing else we have to change here. Yeah, that looks good. So now we're going to just launch the craft. It's going to launch itself actually. And we're going to wait for it to get into orbit. I'm going to show you how all of this works. So basically this is the script I copied directly from that page. The link is obviously in the description below. And the link for my change script that you'll see later is there as well. So here, let's run the script. It should start by saying 3, 2, 1, launch. And actually, I do need to change this part right here. Yeah, the stage has to be 3, I believe, because my staging is a little bit different from the staging they had in their own rocket. So let's launch this and see what happens. So there you go, throttle is up. The rocket is launched. And now we're just going to basically watch it go into the upper atmosphere. It should also be reporting stuff to us right here on the bottom. There should be a bunch of prints. Yeah, there we go. So everything's working fine. We're going to just watch and see what happens. Normally, when I run this, sometimes my rocket starts wobbling around because the speed here is basically not adjusted at all. As a matter of fact, it's going full speed ahead. And so there might be a problem. Let's see if it happens again. But as you can see, the rocket is now automatically being tilted, and basically it's getting its own gravity turn going. This is all based on that formula I showed you earlier that multiplies the ratio by 90 degrees. And it seems to be working fine, but I am going really, really fast. So this rocket, because it's kind of long, might actually be getting too much pressure right here on the tip. And this will start tilting it way too much, way more than it should be tilting. Although it looks like maybe this time we got lucky. I think this time it's actually working just fine. It does seem to not work with all the rockets though. But anyway, so right now we're almost at the end of our gravity turn. And we're going to get a new message soon. We're going to get a message that's going to tell us that we're first to run out of fuel and it's going to separate these boosters automatically. But we're also going to get a different message in a few seconds, I think. Let's see if it happens. Okay, it's looking really good so far. Oh, there we go. It just separated the boosters. But why is my other engine not working? Okay, I think I may have made a mistake in there. Yeah, this needs another activate stage thing because I should have put my stages together. So we can actually do this manually. This will be changing the script that you guys get. But anyway, so here we go. And it's now going to be waiting until the actual speed is enough to get apoapsis of about 150 kilometers. Right now it's at 85. And so once we reach that, it's going to stop completely. So you'll see this happening in a few seconds. And there we go. So it's now adjusting because it's at 90% of the apoapsis. You'll see that it says approaching target apoapsis. This is what we had in the in one of the commands as well. And as soon as it gets to 150, it will stop completely and wait until the target itself, the target apoapsis. And here we go. So now it's just going to wait because the apoapsis is now at 100. It's not 150. I changed it to 100. So now it's going to be waiting until it gets to apoapsis. You can see that it automatically created a node for us as well. There's that node. It also time warped automatically. And it's going to be burning for 346 meters per second right now. So everything is automatic. Everything works pretty much perfectly. And I believe by the time we're finished, we'll have a perfectly circular orbit. Maybe now. There we go. All right, so let's check. Let's check if all of this worked. And look at that. 98 by 100. So almost perfect. So this is kind of it for the script that they've provided for us, but we wanted to be even more perfect than this. The whole point for us was to create something that also adjusts for speed. Now, in other words, what we're going to do now is we're going to first of all go back to the launch pad, and we're now going to change the script just a little bit. And here are the things I'm going to change. First of all, I'm going to put a new thing in this loop that will check for dynamic pressure. it will basically, and this is from the previous video, it will basically check if my dynamic pressure is over 4,000, and if so, it will throttle down. If it's too low, it will throttle up a lot, and if it's right at the spot, it will actually adjust it accordingly. This is coming from the stream we defined right here called dynamic pressure, and the command was added to this part right here. I also had terminal velocity, but I actually decided to remove it because it wasn't working very well. And we are also adding the actual visual representation, visual box. So here we have our canvas. This is from one of the previous videos, so do check it out if you haven't seen it yet. Here we're adding a canvas that will actually display everything on the screen in the game. And we're adding 3 text parts. One of them is going to display, actually this is not thrust, this is dynamic pressure. I made a mistake here. Speed and altitude, and it's also, I need to copy this, I have it somewhere down there as well. It's also displaying it pretty much in real time. And I believe it's actually in PSI, not in kilonewtons. So here we're going to change this just a little bit. Everything else for the most part stays the same. If you want to have this box continuously displaying everywhere, you do have to add it in all of the while loops. So basically you will have our visual representation added to all of the while loops. And oh yeah, this needs to be changed again. So I need to change just these parts because they were thrust before and they're going to be dynamic pressure now. Everything else for the most part is pretty much the same as before. And well, so here comes the ultimate test. So let's see if everything works as intended. So we have several scripts from previous videos here all in one. We have the speed adjuster, we have the tilt adjuster, we have the node creator that will circularize the orbit. We also have the little box that's going to pop up right here that will show us all of the telemetry from this flight. And everything is going to be automatic. I'm going to totally take off my hands and see if it all works fine. Here we go, 3, 2, 1, let's start the script. And watch what happens. So here's the box, here are my hands, here's the rocket taking off and displaying dynamic pressure, displaying speed. I think the box is a little bit too small, it's not displaying the unit. At 4,000 it's going to start adjusting the velocity. This is the actual speed right now, this is the altitude, and look at that, automatically adjusted speed. You can see the rocket is already tilting slightly, the gravity turn has started, and we're basically now are flying. So I'm just going to wait and watch what happens, totally not do anything manually. If it crashes, it crashes. But as of now, this is actually it. This is a perfect script for getting any circular orbit around Kerbin. We did it ourselves. We mostly just used one of the pre-made scripts from kRPC, and everything else we wrote ourselves. Other than that, that's it. Let's watch and see what happens. In the next video, we're going to do the same, but now backwards. We're going to land automatically onto Kerbin, so do come back because I'm going to show you how to write your own script for landing. Anyway, thank you for watching, guys. Enjoy the rest of the video. Hopefully everything works fine. Space out, and as always, bye-bye. And don't forget to subscribe if you still haven't. Don't forget to share this video with someone who enjoys watching space videos and wants to learn some space sciences through video games, and potentially consider supporting this channel on Patreon. As you can see right now, the actual takeoff is a little bit slower than before, mostly because we're adjusting our speed pretty much constantly, and look how good it's doing it. It's trying to keep always around 4,000. Very, very accurate. And you can probably increase this and still be fine, but I just wanted to try this with 4,000 at first. And there we go, this was the final burn. The rocket is now in orbit, perfectly circular, and even more circular than the one we had before, 99 by about 100. So this is it. In the next video, we're going to land on Kerbin. See you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.